NATO combat troops must be out of Afghanistan by the end of this year, and there's no agreement over what will follow. So, plans to create a force of NATO advisors, even the details of who will pay the Afghan army, are up in the air, and Western security chiefs are deeply unhappy.
I'm concerned that if there is no international presence in Afghanistan after 2014, it would also be difficult to generate financial resources to sustain the Afghan security forces. That means they will not be able to pay salaries. And of course, that would be a major security concern.
You also asked the ALP if you want to reassemble the weapons.
A security force of that size goes well beyond the financial capacity of the Afghan government. And if we can't generate financial support, they will be faced with major problems. And this is the reason why I do believe that at the end of the day we will get the signature on the security agreement.
Well, it's interesting that you're confident about that. What does that then say about the behaviour of President Karzai in initially summoning an assembly of tribal leaders to ratify that agreement, but then saying he didn't want it at all, and that he would never sign it? Is that just playing politics?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's politics, but it is remarkable that representatives from the Afghan society at large conveyed a very clear message to President Karzai as well as the international community. We want an international military presence also after 2014. We urge the President to sign as soon as possible. And to go to the bottom line, I don't think President Karzai will sign. So probably it will be for a new president after the presidential elections to sign a security agreement that would allow us to stay after 2014.
When you hear the things President Karzai says about this agreement, saying he won't sign it, leaving the problem for his successor, about the sacrifice of NATO soldiers, his assertions that there was no improvement of security in the south, it would be better if they'd never gone to places like Helmand province. You must despair at his statements sometimes.
Personally, I have an excellent relationship with President Karzai. But having said that, I also have to say that such statements is something like playing with the fire. Because we shouldn't underestimate the damaging effect on public and political support for our presence in Afghanistan when people hear such statements. We have invested a lot in blood and treasure in Afghanistan, also because of our own security. But through our efforts, we have created a framework for a better Afghanistan. So, honestly speaking, I do think people in our countries would expect some signs of gratitude from the Afghan political leadership.
And there's another worry too, about Syria. After 2 shipments of chemical weapons under an international deal, Syria has stopped delivering, citing security concerns. Some American decision makers think it may be time to reconsider military options.
I really urge the Syrian government to live up to its obligations according to the UN Security Council resolution. And I also hope the Russians will put a lot of pressure on the Syrian government.
When does that threat have to go back on the table, do you think, if this deal continues to falter?
The Americans have declared that it's still on the table, but I think we should give diplomacy a chance. Now, the Syrian government has actually agreed to eliminate chemical weapons. They have joined the international treaty against the use of chemical weapons. So far, so good. But now it's a question about the implementation, and they must, of course, comply with the UN Security Council resolution.
Lastly, you're the head of a security organisation, a military-based organisation. How big a problem is it for you that the leading members of that organisation are now so manifestly reluctant to commit their troops to new military adventures and to pay the sort of amount that they used to pay towards their common defence?
When governments are forced to cut deficits and carry through deep cuts across the board, it's difficult to suggest that defense should be exempted. But of course it is a matter of concern, taking into account that other powers in the world invest more and more in security and defense. And at the end of the day, it means that we will have less influence on the international scene. The vacuum will be filled by other powers, and they do not necessarily share our interests and our values.